Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are listening from. Today, I'm delighted to host Dr. Sasi Pillay, who serves as the Chief Information Officer and Vice President of Information Technology Services at Washington State University in this episode of Engineering Tales for ASEI. Dr. Pillay has been a long time member, a life member of ASEI, and very delighted that he's here. Let me tell you a little bit about him before we meet him. Uh, in the role as VP and CIO at WSU, he oversees the computing infrastructure of foundational technologies, research computing, telecom, local area and wide area networking, enterprise-wide applications and services, enterprise endpoint management, and cybersecurity. Now, that's quite a mouthful, isn't it? He has led the development of roadmaps for academic and research computing, administrative and business computing, and foundational technologies, improved the service delivery of the IT organization by instituting change management, architecture review, and project management, and improved IT security across all WSU campuses, including deploying an integrated security operations center and a network operations center. Dr. Pillay and his team have deployed WSU-wide video conferencing, an environment for team-based collaboration, projects that contribute to student success, such as degree auditing and planning. He and his team are actively involved in the design and development of Workday and the conversion of the current LMS system to Canvas. Now, many of you who have been in the academics would know how learning management systems are so critical to the success of the system. A mobile ecosystem that supports the delivery of all the services and consolidated service tests that also supports a chatbot were released under Dr. Pillay's leadership. Now, under this current pandemic situations, a learner laptop and a loaner hotspot program to support online instructions and HIPAA compliant telecounseling capabilities were deployed in the middle of spring semester. A student survey conducted gave overwhelming support for all these programs. And based on this feedback, WSU will enhance these programs and make them a permanent feature for all students. Previously, Dr. Pillay served as an Associate VP and CIO of the Washington State Washington System, University of Washington System, comprising 26 campuses. Earlier, he served as the Chief Technology Officer of Information Technology at National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. Prior to this, he served as the Chief Information Officer of the NASA John H. Glenn Research Center. Dr. Pillay is a recipient of NASA's Exceptional Service Medal and an Outstanding Leadership Medal. He is also the recipient of the Presidential Rank Award, recognizing him as a meritorious executive in the US federal government. Very recently, he was inducted into the CIO Hall of Fame, and we are very proud of his accomplishments. Before he got into the CIO world, he essentially is an engineer. Dr. Pillay received his BS in Mechanical Engineering from Pennsylvania State University and MS and PhD degrees in Computer Engineering from Case Western Reserve University. He also has a master's degree in Management of Technology from the Sloan School of Management at the MIT. I'm so delighted that Dr. Pillay is here. Let's go and talk to him. Good morning, Dr. Pillay. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a fine day here in the month of May in the Palouse, down, I should say, up in the state of Washington.
Well, I'm glad at least we're on the same time zone and doing this on the weekend. Thank you very much for doing this and very warm welcome from ASEI. I think you recall when we first met, it was the ASEI convention in UC Irvine, where you were moderating the big data panel and I was on the panel. So Since then, I've seen you at various ASEI events, but this is the first time we are having this conversation. So, welcome again. Tell us about your roots and your engineering background, and how did you come to the US before we get started about other things?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in India and brought up in India. I did a few years of elementary school in the United States when my dad was teaching at the University of California, Berkeley.
Okay.
But then we returned to India. My dad was a professor at Madras IIT, where I finished my high school. Since then, he then came back to the United States to University of Washington, and I started my undergraduate program there. And then he went on to Pennsylvania State University, where I completed my undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering. My dad first came to this country actually to MIT through a Fulbright scholarship, and then he moved on to University of California, Berkeley. But uh, my passion for engineering, I think, was um, instilled in me, or I acquired it because I was always tinkering with things, and I always enjoyed putting things together. In a sense, of course, at that age, you're not designing things; you're so curious about how things work. So I always was doing that. And my dad, my parents encouraged me a lot by buying me these different types of uh, what I would call toys, which are sort of educational in nature,
Hmm.
sets that you put together that will help you to be creative in terms of making something on your own, based on a design or something that you can actually design yourself. I had a kit for mechanical systems. I had a kit for chemistry labs, and I had a kit for electronic devices, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so that's kind of how I got started, and those types of toys helped encourage me a lot, along with my parents, to be where I am today. My mom actually taught me how to read and write when I was 3 years old, so that helped as well.
Wow, wonderful. So education runs in your blood, and you reminded me of a thing called Meccano when
And that's
I
exactly
used to
what
be
I
a
had.
child.
That's exactly what I had as a. I wasn't sure whether you would recognize that name,
Well,
but that kit is available in India, if you remember.
yeah, and now if you think about it, the small parts and the screws and the nuts that used to come with it wouldn't be legal in the US because a small kid could ingest.
Yes.
And I'm amazed how much I learned from hours and hours of playing with that
Yes.
and
Yes.
Lego. When I grew up a little bit older, I had Lego. So, anyways,
Mhm.
I'm so glad we had something in common there. But your education roots basically then got you into the university system. But
Mhm.
before that, you know, you didn't start off as a CIO, right?
No.
And tell us about how your professional journey started and how
Yeah.
did you get on to become a CIO?
So I finished. I may go back to my training and then go
Mhm.
into my. Okay.
Sure.
So as I was saying, I got my undergraduate degree at Penn State in mechanical engineering, and for some reason, I was not very enthused about mechanical engineering, even though like I had a lot of choices when I started. But I thought mechanical engineering was is a good thing because I felt sort of a little inadequate about did I learn that I needed to do to be a practicing mechanical engineer. So I actually went and bought an old car that I
Hmm.
learned how to fix it up myself, and I felt actually more practical about it. I mean, I had the knowledge, the formal knowledge from that comes from the university, but I felt as an engineer, I should be able to do things and fix things and so on and so forth. I felt that part was didn't mature as much as my formal training did.
Hmm.
So anyway, so I bought a car. I started fixing it up, and I knew everything about a car. But of course, again, these days, when you open up the hood, you don't see anything. Everything's all packed up, and you need to have sophisticated tools to be able to do very many of the things that I did. But fundamentally, then it does become boiled down to or factor down to the basic components that you can eventually fix. But then I was more interested in electronics. That fascinated me more than the mechanical things. But my dad was as usual, the wise one who said, you might want to consider if you're changing from mechanical engineering into something like computers, programming, and there's hardware engineering there. You maybe you like that better than going into pure electronics. But you could come up with a major that included the two. So that's what I did. So after I finished my undergraduate, I applied and got admission to Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, where my dad was at that time for a brief period in his career. He was working as a lead research engineer at GE's Nela Park, because my dad was a metallurgical engineer,
Mm-hmm.
and he was working with high temperature materials and filaments and things like that. Anyway, so I transferred into a master's and PhD program which focused on computing, and then I took up electronics as my master's thesis. So I designed a two-channel uh, telemetry system, micro power telemetry system, which could be implanted, which will measure temperature and heart rate. So I worked on that pure electronic design, and then I created a receiver that also. Let me back up. So the transmitter actually even though it was designed with analog circuitry, it collected the information and then would transfer that information digitally uh, through RF. And then I created a receiving system that collected the signals and was able to decode what was being transmitted and display it numerically on an instrument, just like very many of the instruments you can see in their digital nature, which will display
Mm-hmm.
both the temperature and the heart rate.
Mm-hmm.
And then this implantable device, you could put it in like birds or animals, or maybe even tape it onto human being
Mm-hmm.
subcutaneously or something. So
Mm-hmm.
it could be used for that purpose. That's what my master's thesis was. Then for my PhD thesis, I became more computer oriented. My design was based on, uh, was actually one of the earlier things that we talked about data science.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because as we said, let me put it, we are never at a loss for data. We have so much data that we don't know what to do with.
That's right.
That has been true for a long time. It has only gotten more in the sense that now you can put sensors on anything, you can rapidly collect them. So the what do you call it? The tsunami of data has only increased, or I should say, there's a huge tsunami of data that every day we collect more data than the previous days combined. So we have never been at a loss of data. What we have been always been ill-equipped to do was, as a human, be able to analyze these troves of data and what it contains. So what my PhD thesis was to take a look at this large amount of data and be able to understand how we can build predictive algorithms. And that was my PhD thesis. And my domain of expertise at that time that I used the data analytical principles was on speech recognition and speaker verification. So I designed the system in which a person would say a sentence, sorry, and then we would extract voice features from that, hundreds of voice features. And then I came up with an algorithm that would use Shannon's information content theory to understand the the amount of entropy in a data. The larger the amount of entropy, potentially the higher the source of knowledge it contains. And the idea then is to extract these features with as much entropy as possible, and then use that as a moniker, or I should not a moniker, as a marker to look at new data that's coming in and then match that data against it. And then I also designed it to be adaptive, because voice is something that changes slightly over time and all that. So, and then I designed it as an adaptive system, which worked as an online capability. But in those days, the computational speed and the amount of memory we had available to work with, and was also all very limited. So it almost took a full, by the time a person uh, spoke the sentence, and I did the analysis, did the comparison and the templates, and found the objective function statistically, it'll take a full 10 minutes for the online system to say, oh, is that Piyush or is that somebody else? But the funny thing is that in the last 5 years or so, I noticed that Charles Schwab has incorporated some of the very basic principles into speaker verification instead of using
Ah,
user IDs and passwords. I'm not
voice
saying they used,
recognition.
I'm not saying they used my PhD thesis, but the concept of making that into a practical reality has come with the availability of cloud computing and computational speeds of tremendously increased multiple folds, many orders of magnitude, and so on. Anyway, it's a very interesting journey. When I look back and say, oh, gee, I'm glad I did all that.
Yeah, it sounds like you had fun doing it as well. A lot of diverse
Absolutely.
things from mechanical engineering to electronics to computers. And in fact, you reminded me of my undergrad thesis as well. A speech recognition system. I had worked with scientists at CIRI, India, Central Electronics Engineering Research Institute, where I'd done my internship during my undergrad days, and that ultimately became my final year project as well. I
Mm.
had a 8-bit microprocessor to start with,
Okay.
and speech recognition, and it would recognize only 64 words at that time. So, but
Mm.
anyways, that's history,
Mm.
and let's move on to the new world of data and cloud that you are leading your charge through. Very intrigued how your journey from your PhD thesis. How did you get started on the CIO path?
Okay. Now, there are also, I was at that time, after I finished my PhD, I still was quite interested in trying to see if I can do a medical degree. And so for that reason, I actually, my first job I took was at the university. I was working as an assistant professor. And they actually gave me the title and the salary even before I got my PhD. I was still working on my thesis.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I was quite intrigued by the fact that, okay, maybe I can try to do that and apply the principles of engineering and medicine and so on and so forth. And Case Western Reserve is a great place to do interdisciplinary work. So they're one of the pioneers who offered MD, PhD programs and people moving in from one, what do you call it, not only profession, one discipline to other. So anyway, when they offered me that job, that's what I was doing. I was doing clinical medicine using, not practicing medicine, but applying tools and technologies. And there I worked with a leading professor who's a chair of the department on EEG, analyzing fetal EEG, and also using movement data in analyzing movement of the fetus uh, before birth, during the prenatal time, the third trimester and the second trimester, to see how active the baby is, and then trying to
Mm-hmm.
predict the outcome of the baby when they're born. So I was again using data science, using signals from biometrics, if you want to look at it that way.
Awesome,
Um,
awesome.
and then I decided that's when I married my wife, who's a physician, and she's the one who actually talked me out of being a physician. She said, "Hey, one physician in the family is enough." So I said, "Okay, if I'm not going to be a physician, then I would rather go to an organization where there's a what do you call, a recognition of engineering talents available." So luckily for me, NASA was nearby. There's a NASA research center right in Cleveland, so I went there. And one of the first jobs they gave me, it was to connect all the computers together. We have multiple different computers: Digital Equipment Corporation computers, IBM computers, mainframe computers, and supercomputers.
Mm-hmm.
So we had all these, and they're all from different vendors. So my job initially was to collect them. Then also we also use microprocessors to collect data from that we would collect from real-time evaluation of samples in wind tunnels. So we use microprocessors like the ones that you talked about earlier. And
Mm.
so the whole idea was to be able to network and connect all, because all these computers existed as silos.
Yeah.
So I worked with the lead engineer and he was the lead on creating at that time the first local area network on campus. So we used cable TV and the different bandwidths available on the cable TV to connect them to different channels. And then I was able to connect them. And then I wrote the initial protocol, how you would connect these computers together and then move forward. Then later on at that time, TCP/IP was just beginning.
Yeah.
So I jumped on that, and when we changed our, level one and level two to TCP/IP, but still use my application protocol, where I have defined the headers and so on and so forth, so these computers can talk to each other. So I was able to change underneath the level one and level two, move to TCP/IP, rather than using some, the basic signaling that we had developed. And so we had developed the units called bus interface units that you connect. It's almost like you can think of it like a cable modem, but
Yeah.
far more sophisticated than a cable modem. That's what we designed and we interfaced with computers, and then that became the standard by which all our computers were interconnected, and that was a huge success.
Yeah. No, sounds like fun. And now, just remind me, this was before Ethernet came?
No, this is the right after Ethernet. You're making me
Okay.
sound very old there, Piyush.
No,
So I'm old.
well, we're all in the same boat here.
It's sort of
Uh,
nice to though. I really appreciate the conversation because very rarely we have time to sit and reflect on what has
that's right.
happened and where we are, and it's really invigorating, to say the least. So thank you for giving me the opportunity for us to jointly discuss this.
Yeah, actually, when you were talking about the Shannon's information theory and data acquisition systems, and some of my undergrad courses in that, I'm remembering digital information system (DICs), and
Yeah,
there is the seven-layer protocol, APS, TNDP, and you're talking about the network layer where you had developed that protocol. So it's you know of course, I'm happy right now, but I know I'll have a nightmare about not passing one of the exams back.
yeah, it's and it's fun about it. Even and some of these things, I kind of glossed over some of the analog to the data collection, because we realized early on, yeah, we might start with analog stuff, but the sooner we can make it digital, like going back to your point about digital transformation,
Yeah,
that thinking about digital transformation, we didn't call it by those kinds of buzzwords at that time, but that was always on our mind. Our first opportunity to take a signal, and we recognize some of the signals can only be coming in as analog. And then we started designing, of course, sensors that would collect the data digitally from the get-go. But
yeah.
quite often, as soon as we had the first opportunity for any signal that can be converted to digital, we did that. So we designed a lot of interface cards, in the old days with the ADD converters on it, and we interfaced that directly to our experiments that we were running, and we converted them digital. Then we put it on the network through this bus interface unit connected to the computer. Then it is stored for data analysis, post-run data analysis. So that's kind of the whole life cycle: collection of data, storage of data, and then post. And then we ran some of these models on the supercomputer. So every
Mhm.
computer was used in some aspect along this network.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, I have noticed this that you have transformed yourself from mechanical to electronics to computer engineering, and again, domains as well. Now, you know, in space research,
Mhm.
there's a separate amount of type of mindset needed, and then in the education system where you are transforming the lives of students as well as your faculty, basically by providing the infrastructure, but by providing the IT systems. Now, uh, what did you do to transform your thinking, or how did you train yourself to go from the space domain to education system domain?
Yeah. So I told you soon after, and while I was getting my PhD, I was working as an assistant professor in the medical school. So that exposed me to a lot of the stuff. Plus, like my dad, like with his PhD and with mine, we've been in the academic side of the house for a long time. So I look at NASA also being a career in which I was supporting engineers and researchers in the use of computers and analysis of data. So I did not see from what I was doing as a huge change. What was different is what the environment is. So now we are trying to apply the same data principles that I talked about earlier. And how can we understand the student who's at risk? And then what are the things that we can provide en route so they can indeed graduate like every other student on time in 4 years. I always say the content or the kind of tools and ideas and thinking is not any different. What is different is the context has changed. So I say the content has remained the same, but the context is what has changed. And
Got it.
early on, I was applying that for the medical profession. How do you use the data to predict the outcome of newborn infants? And then similarly, what can we do to understand better and then hopefully do less and less physical testing and do more analysis in cyberspace when I was working for NASA. And now, again, using the same types of concepts and to understand better. So I plan to use the same thing that I did for my PhD thesis when I'm looking at student data is to say, okay, which of these factors are the most relevant and most important to figure out? Now, we do have some clues, right? I mean, if you don't go to class, the chance of you being successful is going to be less.
Hmm.
But the thing is that we should not be so preoccupied with the academic success of a student alone. There are so many, because human being is not so mechanical in the sense that we have to look at that again from a gestalt kind of thinking. What
Hmm.
is the health and wellness of the student? So you could be getting top, you could be a top student in a class, but if your mental health is problematic, it doesn't matter if whether you're acing every single exam in your study as a student at the university, but if you have challenges with that, or you're financially challenged, or
Hmm.
you feel you're not belonging, so in a group, like so this whole idea of people think diversity, um, equity and inclusion, for example, is sort of a distraction. Some people might think of it that way, but for all of us, it is an important ingredient for our success. So these social kind of things and physical health kind of things, and the sense of belonging, and all those things, financial pieces, components, there's also important for to predict the success of a student in our university. So you can already see the number of different domains that have to be analyzed to be able to come up with something that's reasonable that we can use to intervene and help the student succeed.
Well, that's a great way to say that, multiple domains, you've got to integrate the knowledge. And again, as you are applying, your end product is a healthy individual who is mentally, intellectually, and physically capable of contributing to the society. And that's what you are producing in your uh, university. And thank you for your contributions in making a great environment for your students. I read your uh, bio, and how during this pandemic you've been able to institute newer systems which help the students during pandemic, and now your university system is going to make them available for all students for a permanent time. So
Mhm.
that proves that you were able to use this pandemic as an opportunity to experiment and evolve
Mhm.
your delivery mechanisms and for the student outcomes. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and going back to this data analytics, I think the earlier we realized we can have better predictive models if we use multivariate analysis. Multiple domains are so critical. Otherwise, if you only stick on one domain, you can only get to about 70%
That's right.
accuracy, and the remaining 30%, no matter how hard you try, you'll never get there without including, other uh, dimensions, or in this case, other domains, as you said.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, let's shift a little bit gears to the message for ASEI members. And you've been involved with ASEI. So talk about how you got involved and what's your message for the younger generation of engineers who are listening to you?
Yeah, so, I got involved with ASCI when I was working for NASA quite some time ago. Then I continued that even when I was a chief technology officer for IT at NASA. But once I moved into the university, I kind of lost track of it. not because I didn't want to, but there were so many other pressing engagements that, especially since I now changed where I was working, like we talked about earlier,
Hmm. Hmm.
required a lot of attention on my part. But getting back to your second part of your question, what's important for the young engineer growing up? I think what I would strongly recommend any engineer who's graduating is to get some practical experience as soon as possible. In fact, look, even though I went through a crash course in getting an engineering degree, in 3 years, and so on and so forth. What I missed was the opportunity to apply my knowledge as I was learning. Remember when I said after I felt graduate, got an undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering, but I felt very inadequate. I mean, I didn't feel that I could hire myself for to do some mechanical engineering type of work because I felt there's still something lacking. That's when I said I went and bought a car, so at least I can learn some practical aspects
Yeah, yeah,
of doing things. So, in order to avoid that, I would strongly recommend that a student in the current engineering program be revised, like we have in India. Like you have some practical experience. That's why engineering degrees take longer than. And I'm not denigrating any other discipline, but that's why, like the medical degree. Why does a medical degree take so much longer? Why? Because they're applied, they're learning, they're applying, they're learning, they're applying, learning, applying.
right.
See, that part is kind of missing here. And I
Yeah,
think we need to institute that. So one way the student can do is like I was trying to do by myself. Okay, how do I get that practical experience? So any opportunity they have to work either when they are in school or they are working for summer time frame, rather than finding a summer job in, I don't know, working in a hamburger place or a restaurant where they might learn some obviously social skills and communication skills and customer focus. Yeah, those are all social skills and soft skills that one needs to learn as well. But also spending some time learning some of these practical things. So if a Microsoft or if computer science is your chosen profession or computer engineering, looking for jobs that will help you to apply some of the things you learned. And early on, you learn how to work in a team and so on and so forth. The better
hmm,
off you will be as a successful engineer downstream.
right, right.
So that connection between knowledge that you gain in the classroom and how you're able to apply that directly to some of the problem solving methodologies are, I think, are critical for a person's success.
Very important. I think you were alluding to internships, and
Mhm.
while internships are optional, and I encourage the kids that I mentor, or even my own kids,
Mhm.
to go through internships right starting from when they're in high school itself, so that
Correct.
you get some exposure. And I
Mhm.
have documented evidence and personal experience where I've seen kids change their disciplines based on internship experiences. They have even moved away from to doing totally from away from engineering thing by going into the industry and saying, oh no, this is not what I want to do.
Yeah, right.
And uh, so it's a two-edged sword, but at the same time, the earlier a student is able to apply their knowledge and see how they will be able to be successful in an industry, the better it is for
Mhm.
overall education system, as well as student, as well as the parents who are spending money perhaps on their kid. So
Yeah,
um,
it's a great motivating thing, right? When you see, hey, you learned something, you applied, and now you see a result. That is a very a virtuous cycle.
yeah, yeah,
Keep you
yeah,
motivated and to keep you stay in school and so on and so forth. So
yeah,
I think it has to be, especially for our professions, it has to be integrated in the curriculum. Now, because you don't know what you don't know unless you sort of experience it.
that's right.
And I think internship is one of the best ways to do that. So that's one of the things that we're trying to get started here at Washington State University. It's what I call a degree plus program, in which we invite student workers from all over the campus. And I told my folks when we are doing the hiring, please do not just focus on computer science students or double E students. Please be open to invite students coming from literature or journalism and communication and art history, because the diversity again is a very critical part. They have a mindset to look at a problem, think of it differently than the way you and I think about it, And we want that diversity of approach when you're looking at a problem you're trying to solve.
Right, right,
And and for their benefit, exactly what you said, Piyush, is they're not exposed to some of these technologies. They always avoided them or shunned it or whatever, for whatever reason. But giving them an opportunity to work at the ground level with some of our employees as mentors goes a long way to instill confidence in them in the use of technology. And for all when they're waiting for their chosen, a coveted job as an artistry curator in a museum in Italy, they could still be working in a technology field and making a very good livelihood on the
right,
things that we have taught them. That's why I
right.
call it like a degree plus
Excellent.
program. Yeah. So I'm hoping that we can get that started and get certificates through industry-based certificates issued to these students who are working with us for 2 years at least. If they join us at least sophomore, 2, 3 years working with us, and we have lots of openings, whether it is whether it's a service desk or doing forensic analysis for cybersecurity or infrastructure and network. I mean, you name it, we have it.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I want to point out that when we started the ASEI Silicon Valley chapter, focusing on young minds was one of our themes, and internships were central to that. So in the first year itself, we were able to place about 5 students
Hmm.
for both from high school to engineering undergrads, as well as one postgrad. We were able to network with our community members and encourage those hiring managers to take on interns. And again, these are student members of ASEI as well as kids of our established members who can
Hmm.
get the benefit of this. Now we have formalized this program as part of University Connect, where
Hmm.
we are having a network of university professors and university administrators who are providing that backbone support. And in February, with Dr. Pradeep Khosla, we launched this program for ASEI, and you were part of that as well. You attended perhaps. And now we want to see how this program can be extended to other universities, and would
Hmm.
definitely love your support. And collaboratively, I think we can do a lot together.
Sounds good.
Awesome. So, what would be one message for uh, the people who are not yet members of ASEI, and how organizations like American Society of Engineers can add value to engineers, experienced or not?
Hmm. So I think we can position ourselves, and I think you are doing that, is to be seen as contributing to the education of uh, engineers coming into the foray, being able to make these connections. So going back to the student-centric ecosystem that we're trying to do, it's not just about students who are at our university now that we want to connect with. It's also students who are our alumni, because what we want to do is something similar. We want to maintain a connection between our existing students, let's say a student in engineering or a student in art history, and a previous student who graduated from our institution and is an alum, and they want to help the current set of students to connect a bridge between the two. And I think that's just that, and that will help, because it's like a student, I don't know, should I go into art history, should I go into journalism, or should I go into computer science? I don't know. I think I can do reasonably well in all of them, but how do I decide? So aligning them with successful alums that graduated from our university as part of a advising group rather than just the advising group that exists on campus, in my mind, is critical. Sorry to taking that long to explain that, but that same concept works here, and ASCI can be that glue that connects the student members to these opportunities, because there are also ASCI professionals in these companies that they're trying to get internships with.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's the same kind of model that I was explaining that exists in a university. We're trying to connect current students with alums. ASEI could be that agent that does the same for students who are ASEI members.
Absolutely. And we have recently started doing a lot more work in that space. So more to come. Stay
Mhm.
tuned. One thing which I did want to touch upon for the experienced members, for professionals who've been in the industry for some time, and are looking at the CIO career. So, a couple of questions on that I would like you to address. There's no school for becoming a CIO, right?
Right.
Every individual has their own unique path that they charted. And
Mhm.
I've also heard in the past that an average CIO tenure is 18 months, and then
Mhm.
they roll on and do new things. You have been a CIO for 2 decades now. So tell us the secret of how you became successful, and how does one get started to think about like a CIO, and how does one retain the CIO title?
Yeah, yeah. It's being a CIO is definitely a challenge, and I think at the end of the day, one of the emphasis that I try to make, not only for myself but for my staff as well, is we are here to serve, and it's not about bringing new technology. It is not buying new tools. It's not about a new system and this and that and whatnot. It's about how am I addressing your problem? What are your problems? So we have to get smart at a few things. One is we need to understand the pain points of our customers, our constituents. So that's why I'm so, not only that, but also from a moral perspective, student success comes to mind naturally. So if we are spending a lot of energy on the IT organization, helping, making sure our student retention and graduation rates improve, who is going to come and say, oh, that's not relevant work? It's almost everybody will sign on and say, oh, these are important, because at the end of the day, one of the main reasons the universities exist is to educate the next generation. And then what we're trying to say is, okay, what are the tools we can provide to work with you to make sure we realize that vision? That applies equally on the research computing side. Okay,
Mhm.
because one of the other objectives of the university is the research output. What are the discoveries we are making for humankind? That's important. And then, of course, the third one is outreach. What are we doing to help the communities at large thrive? So when you look at those large mission or vision principles and outcomes, and you design our approach to support those things, it's important. So every year we publish an annual report based on the accomplishments of our organization, but it is definitely couched first and foremost on the successes of our constituents. And so when you read that, it's how we made our constituents successful. Oh, by the way, this is what the recipe we use to make them successful. It is not just talking about how IT is successful. It's about talking about how we made our students, faculty, and staff successful in their endeavors, and what was IT's role in accomplishing that. So it's at the end, we're saying the same thing, but how it is presented and how it is couched and how you talk, it's important. I remember I was on a panel not too long ago, uh, and the vice president of student affairs from another institution said, when I was talking about, sort of said, for the life of me, I thought you were another VP of student affairs as opposed to being a CIO. And my boss, the president of the university, says the same thing. The passion that I exhibit for success of our students, is, he said, is unparalleled, and he has never seen a technologist express it so. So quite often people ask, because I rarely talk about technology. I mean, I probably talked a lot more about technology with you because you and I come from the same mold, so it was
Yeah.
kind of nice to commensurate and all that. But that's why I said it was sort of interesting conversation we had this morning. It was made me remember some of our roots and what we did and so on. But rarely I have that opportunity because my organization, we are so focused on making our constituents successful. And so at the end of the day, if we make our constituents successful, by definition, then we are successful. So to me, that is probably the thing that I focus on. And of course, as part of this is soft skills and customer focus and so on and so forth, that they're all just as important. But if you were to ask me, what is the number one thing I would say that's one. If you focus on making your constituents successful, you by definition will be successful. And that's the principle that I have used in my entire career.
That's great. That's wonderful. In fact, that's what entrepreneurs use. How do you make your investors successful? How do you make your stakeholders successful for a public company CEO? That's important. And so, in your career, you are the CEO of your career. Who are the stakeholders? uh, Again, this is the message for the viewers and listeners here. How do you apply the principles that Dr. Pillay today shared with us in your own life? Think
Mhm.
about it. Write in the chat comments here, and we would have a drawing for the best answer and
Mhm.
courtesy our sponsors, and you'll win some prizes. So please do that. And in parting, I want to congratulate you, Dr. Pillay, on being inducted into the CIO Hall of Fame, and a tremendous career you've had through these decades of dedicated service to the stakeholders that you've had, first at NASA and now in the university system. So thank you so much for being here, and namaste to you.
No,
And that's a great welcome, as well as thank you for all you do in your life and for ASEI. Thank you
yeah,
very
thank you,
much.
Piyush, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. And this is very invigorating. So,
Let's continue the conversation. So thank you very much. Bye bye.